The clinking of glasses was the kind of sound you hear at every wedding. Ordinary, familiar, almost comforting. Candles flickered across the polished wood of the Officers' Club at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, casting warm light over rows of tables dressed in white cloth and silver cutlery. For a fleeting moment, everything looked perfect, as though the day had unfolded exactly as I had imagined it. The hum of a small quartet played gently in the corner, their music weaving through the laughter of soldiers who had become my brothers and sisters. I stood in my ivory dress, silk trailing against the floor, my hand clasped in Daniel's. He looked steady, composed, every inch the Navy officer, even in a civilian suit. His presence anchored me, but the weight pressing against my chest would not lift. My gaze kept wandering, drawn unwillingly to the row of seats marked for family. Empty. The ribbons tied neatly around the chairs seemed almost cruel, like placeholders for people who had chosen not to come. No father straightening his tie. No mother dabbing at her eyes. No brother beaming with pride. Just air. Just absence where love should have been. I tried to bury the ache with routine gestures. Smile for the camera. Raise the glass. Lean close as Daniel and I cut the cake. Applause filled the room. Voices shouting their congratulations, but each sound ricocheted inside me, against that hollow place I had carried for years. Then, from the hidden seam of my dress, I felt it. The faint vibration of my phone. At first, I ignored it, unwilling to let the outside world intrude. But the buzzing came again, then again, insistent. Slipping my hand into the pocket, I drew it out under the table. The screen glowed in the dim light. 42 missed calls, 1 new message. All from my mother. My chest tightened. For months, silence. For years, rejection. And now, tonight of all nights, a barrage of calls. The champagne glass in my hand trembled. Daniel's fingers brushed against mine, steadying me without a word. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He knew something inside me had shifted. I forced myself to smile for the guests, raising my glass higher, my words of gratitude spilling out rehearsed and hollow. The room erupted in cheers, but I barely heard them. My thoughts clung to the glow of that phone screen, to the unanswered questions stacking in my chest. If you've ever been cast aside by your family, you know it doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, through silences, through the empty rows on the most important day of your life. It cuts deeper than any wound the battlefield could deliver, because it isn't the enemy that rejects you. It's your own blood. And yet, even as the ache threatened to pull me under, I knew this night was only the surface of something far deeper. A reckoning that had begun years ago, long before I became Major Caroline Hayes, long before I wore this uniform. Before the medals and the ranks, I was just a daughter in a small Texas town where Friday night lights ruled every conversation. Our home in San Marcos was neat, strict, and always humming with expectation. My father, Richard Hayes, a retired Marine, believed discipline was oxygen. My mother, Evelyn, a nurse who carried both gentleness and steel, enforced his rules with quiet precision. And then there was Michael, my younger brother by 3 years. He was everything they seemed to dream of. Broad-shouldered, charming, the high school quarterback who could make crowds roar simply by walking onto the field. Coaches called him a natural. Neighbors praised him endlessly. My parents glowed when his name was spoken as if his victories reflected their own worth. Meanwhile, I learned to chase my triumphs in silence. I poured myself into academics, debate team captain, National Honor Society, top of my class. When I earned a full ROTC scholarship, I thought perhaps this would be the moment they truly saw me. But recognition never came. At every milestone, Michael's shadow stretched long. My father's voice boomed with pride when speaking of his touchdowns, while my report cards earned little more than a distracted nod. "Good job," he would say, already reaching for the sports section to track Michael's stats. The day I commissioned through ROTC was supposed to change that. My uniform pressed sharp, the saber gleaming in my hand, the stage flooded with sunlight as I stepped forward. I searched the stands for their faces, waiting for that spark of pride. But the seats were empty. Later, I would learn they had flown to California instead. Michael had a playoff game, and they couldn't miss it. That hollow in my chest didn't form overnight. It was carved gradually, absence by absence. Each missed recital, each skipped ceremony, each photo where only Michael stood in the spotlight. I began to believe invisibility was my assigned role in the family. He was the rising star, and I was only the steady glow beside him. Useful, but unremarkable. Even when I tried to share my world with them, the long nights of study, the exhaustion of field training, the pride of earning leadership awards, the response was muted. My mother would smile faintly, then turn the conversation back to Michael's future, as though my path was a side note in the story of our family. If you've ever been the forgotten child, you know the worst part isn't silence itself. It's realizing the silence is intentional, that they choose not to see you. Standing on that parade field, saber raised, I understood with painful clarity. In their story, I was never meant to be the main character. When my parents turned away from my commissioning ceremony, I decided I would build a life where I could not be ignored. The Army became that life. What started as a path to independence soon became a foundation stronger than anything my family had ever offered. In the Army, I was no longer the background character. I was necessary. Every decision I made mattered. Every action could mean survival. There was no room for favoritism, no space for empty praise, only the truth of whether you could stand when the ground shook beneath you. My first deployment to Afghanistan carved that truth into my bones. I was 24, barely past Cadet Gray, when I commanded a convoy near Kandahar. The road stretched endlessly, heat shimmering above the sand. Then came the sound, an eruption that split the sky. Dust and fire swallowed the first vehicle, and gunfire cracked through the air. For a heartbeat, fear clawed at my throat, but training and instinct snapped sharper than panic. Orders flew from my lips as though they had always been there. Secure the perimeter. Return fire. Move forward. And then I saw him, Captain Jordan Wells, trapped inside a burning transport, flames licking the metal like hungry jaws. Without thinking, I ran. The heat blistered my skin, smoke seared my lungs, but I would not stop. I pulled him free, his weight dragging me down, his blood smearing across my uniform. By the time we staggered behind cover, my hands were shaking, my chest heaving. Jordan looked at me, coughing through the smoke, and managed a grin. "You dragged me back into this world by sheer stubbornness," he rasped. From that day forward, Jordan was more than a fellow officer. He became the brother I had never truly had. In foxholes, in makeshift barracks, in the silence between missions, we shared the kind of trust that can only be forged when death breathes down your neck. The Army gave me what my blood never had, a family bound not by expectation, but by loyalty. Soldiers who would carry your weight when your legs gave out, who would shield you with their own bodies, who would stay awake through the longest nights so you could rest. Every salute, every clasped hand, every shoulder leaned against in exhaustion, it was proof that I was seen, valued, and irreplaceable. Back home, Michael's name filled newspaper headlines and social feeds. My parents beamed at every mention, their pride louder than any bullet I had faced. But overseas, in the dust and blood, I had something greater. I had a family that chose me. And in that family, I found the piece of myself my parents had refused to acknowledge. I was not invisible. I was enough. It was during a joint training exercise at the naval base in Norfolk, Virginia, that I first met him. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, Navy intelligence officer, carried himself with the kind of quiet assurance that came from years of service. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but when he spoke, people listened. At first, I noticed him only in passing. Discussions over strategy, briefings that stretched late into the night. But there was something unsettling about the way his eyes held mine. Not the stiff recognition of rank, not the casual glance of a colleague. He looked at me as though he could see past the ribbons and the uniform, straight into the parts of me I had tried to keep buried. One evening, after a grueling exercise, while most of us collapsed into chairs with exhaustion, Daniel sat beside me quietly. He didn't start with small talk. He simply said, "You carry more than most people can imagine. But strength isn't just what you keep on your shoulders. It's also what you let someone else hold for you." The words hit harder than any medal ceremony because they spoke to the truth I had never dared to admit. I had built walls so high no one could scale them, not even me. And yet here was someone willing to shoulder the weight. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. What unsettled me most was how natural it felt to let him in. Slowly, Cautiously, I learned to unclench fists I hadn't realized were still closed. In his presence, I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the hardened officer. I was simply Caroline, a woman worth being loved as she was, not as someone's shadow. Months later, after another long day of field training, we returned to base covered in dust. The sun was dipping low, the flag snapping sharply in the evening wind. Daniel dropped to one knee right there in the courtyard, his uniform still streaked with sweat and sand. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then the courtyard erupted, soldiers, my soldiers, shouting a thunderous hoo-ah that echoed against the concrete and sky. In that moment, joy surged through me so pure it nearly drowned out every scar I had carried. For the first time, I felt chosen. Not as a duty, not as an afterthought, but as someone's first and only choice. That night, I dialed the number I had memorized since childhood. Hope burned fragile in my chest as I told my mother everything. The proposal, the cheers, the way Daniel had looked at me. I waited for her joy to meet mine. Instead, she sighed. "That's nice, Caroline. But Michael just got hired as assistant coach for a national team. Can you believe it? We're throwing him a party next week." Her words sliced deep. My triumph once again was nothing compared to his spotlight. Daniel and I decided our wedding would be simple. Not the kind of spectacle Michael would host in some hotel ballroom, but a ceremony rooted in meaning. We chose to marry on base, surrounded by the people who had stood with us through war, exhaustion, and sacrifice. Soldiers, sailors, and friends who had become our family. We sent invitations to my parents too, though a quiet voice inside me warned not to expect much. Hope is stubborn like that. It clings even when bruised 1,000 times. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with notifications. Michael had announced his engagement on social media. The photos looked like something from a luxury magazine. Her diamond ring catching chandelier light, my parents glowing beside him, their arms around his fiancée. But the detail that hollowed me out was the date. The exact same day as my wedding. I stared at the screen until the edges blurred. Was it intentional? Or was the universe simply cruel? The call came that evening. My mother's voice, sweet at first, then clipped. "Caroline, couldn't you be flexible? Michael's engagement is already booked. Deposits paid. It doesn't make sense to compete. You can always choose another date." Another date. As if my vows, my love, my life could be rearranged like a dentist appointment so Michael could have the stage. I bit my tongue until the taste of iron filled my mouth. The betrayal didn't stop there. Laura Mitchell, my closest friend since grad school, the woman I had chosen as maid of honor, called days later. Her voice wavered, but her decision was firm. "Caroline, I've agreed to MC Michael's engagement. It's a big opportunity. Connections, exposure. You understand, right?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat closed around the words that wanted to spill out. How do you tell someone that her ambition had gutted the only friendship you thought unshakable? The rehearsal should have steadied me, but instead it hollowed me further. The pews meant for family sat in silence, their emptiness louder than any choir. That evening, my father left a voicemail. His voice was casual, efficient. "I can't make it, Caroline. I promised Michael I'd help with preparations. Good luck." Good luck. As though I were running a race instead of standing on the threshold of a life I had fought to build. For a moment, the weight of abandonment nearly broke me. My knees buckled, the dress heavy in my hands, and then, across the hall, a familiar voice anchored me. Major Hayes doesn't stand alone. It was Captain Jordan Wells, crisp in uniform, his wife at his side. He had flown across the country to be here. His eyes held no pity, only certainty. "If your father won't walk you down that aisle," he said firmly, "then I will. Because family, the kind that matters, never leaves you behind." Something cracked open inside me then. Not despair, but relief. I wasn't alone. Not completely. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright, sunlight spilling over the gates of Fort Campbell like a benediction. My hands shook as I fastened the last buttons of my dress, the ivory fabric catching the light with each breath I took. For a moment, the mirror reflected someone I barely recognized. Not the daughter always standing in the shadows, but a woman about to step into her own story. The chapel was dressed simply. White roses lined the aisle, Candles flickered against wooden beams, and flags stood proud at the altar. Yet when the doors opened and I stepped inside, my eyes locked instantly on the row reserved for my family. Empty. The sight stole my breath. For a moment, it felt like the ground tilted beneath me. But then I felt it. Jordan's arm steady against mine, his metals glinting under the soft light. He leaned closer, his voice low and certain. "One step at a time, Caroline. You don't walk alone today." We moved forward together. Each stride was an act of defiance, a declaration that absence would not define me. As we passed the vacant chairs, the hush of the room deepened, heavy with what wasn't there. And then, all at once, it shifted. Boots scraped against the floor, echoing in perfect unison. My unit, men and women who had faced fire and loss beside me, rose as one. Hands lifted to brows, crisp salutes cutting through the air. The sound was thunder and silence all at once. For a heartbeat, my throat closed. My vision blurred. These were not blood relatives, but they had become more. Brothers and sisters in arms, bound by loyalty, not lineage. Their salute filled every hollow space, every wound left by the people who should have been there. Daniel stood at the altar, his gaze steady, his smile the anchor I needed. By the time I reached him, tears threatened to spill, but they weren't born of grief. They were born of gratitude. The vows passed in a blur, yet every word carved itself deep into my heart. When the chaplain pronounced us husband and wife, applause shook the walls. Laughter, cheers, the joy of a family I had chosen, not one I had begged for. Dinner was warm, voices overlapping, glasses clinking. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Yet even in the swell of joy, my phone lay on the table, screen glowing insistently. 42 missed calls, dozens of messages, all from my mother. I tried to ignore it, tried to stay inside the warmth of Daniel's smile and the echoes of my soldiers' cheers. But the device vibrated again and again, like a pulse refusing to be silenced. It wasn't just noise. It was the beginning of something darker. By the time the reception ended and the last of my guests drifted out into the cool Kentucky night, the phone still pulsed with unread messages. I finally slipped outside, the silk hem of my dress brushing against the pavement, and pressed call. My mother answered on the first ring. Her voice was sharp, trembling not with joy but accusation. "Caroline, how could you shut us out like this? Your brother showed us the emails, the ones where you said we weren't welcome, that your soldiers were your only family. Do you have any idea how humiliated we felt?" The words knocked the air from my lungs. "What? Mom, I never—" But she didn't let me finish. Her voice rose, brittle and angry. We sat at home thinking our own daughter had disowned us on her wedding day. "Michael showed us everything." I lowered onto the stone steps, my chest burning. Michael, of course. He had hacked into my accounts, forged messages that I would never write, twisting my loyalty into rejection. And my parents, so eager to defend him, so conditioned to believe in his spotlight, had swallowed it whole without a single question. "I never wrote those emails," I whispered. But my mother only sobbed, her words cracking. My father's silence weighed heavier than her tears, the same silence that had followed me since childhood. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, my phone cold in my palm, Daniel's hand eventually finding mine. He didn't press for details. His steady presence said enough. News of Michael's glittering engagement in Houston reached me within days. Guests crowded beneath chandeliers, cameras flashing as if it were a royal event. My parents were there in their finest clothes, smiling as if nothing had happened. But fate has a way of stripping lies bare. Midway through the celebration, his fiancée Hannah stumbled upon the truth. A forgotten laptop, a trail of drafts, and sent messages that revealed Michael's deceit, the emails he had forged, the manipulation he had spun. In front of hundreds, she tore the diamond ring from her finger and hurled it onto the floor. Her voice cut through the music like a blade. "I will not marry a man who betrays his own sister to get ahead." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Guests whispered, jaws slack, phones raised to capture every second. My parents stood frozen, their perfect image collapsing alongside Michael's. Social media lit up within hours. Headlines shifted from Golden Boy's engagement to scandal at Houston Gala. Videos spread like wildfire. Hannah's trembling voice, Michael's face drained of color. the ring glittering abandoned on the floor. And yet, even as I watched the storm unfold from afar, there was no satisfaction in it. His downfall didn't erase the rows of empty chairs at my wedding. It didn't give me back the family I had longed for. All it did was confirm what I had already learned. The blood ties I had clung to all my life could unravel with a single lie. The hotel suite smelled faintly of coffee and wilting roses when I walked in. My parents were already there, sitting stiff on the couch, their faces pale, their eyes swollen from tears. For a moment, I saw them not as the towering figures of my childhood, but as two people unraveling, stripped of the pride they had worn like armor. My mother rose first. Her hands shook as she reached for mine. "Caroline, we're sorry. We've been blind. We thought Michael needed us more, so when he showed us those emails, we believed him. We didn't see what we were doing to you." My father's voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "We thought we were protecting him, and in the process, we abandoned you." His eyes glistened, but the words felt like smoke. Too late, too fragile to hold. I steadied my breath and looked at them, my voice low but firm. "You didn't just believe him. You abandoned me on the one day I should have mattered most. Do you understand? I walked down that aisle without you. That can't be undone." Their tears came harder, but I didn't bend. For the first time in my life, I didn't fold myself small to fit their version of family. "I don't need easy apologies," I continued. "If you want me in your lives, something has to change. Real change. Family counseling for all of us. And Michael, he needs help. Not indulgence, not excuses, professional intervention. Until then, I can't pretend we're okay." Silence stretched, broken only by my mother's sobs. My father finally nodded, the weight of his pride cracking. "If that's the only way forward, we'll do it," he whispered. But even then, I had already drawn my boundary. My future wasn't theirs to dictate anymore. When I stepped out of the suite, Daniel was waiting downstairs, his hands steady, his eyes carrying the kind of certainty I had searched for all my life. The cool night wrapped around us as I slipped my hand into his, and together we walked out into the quiet streets. Behind us, my parents called my name. Their voices were heavy with regret, but I didn't look back. Not in anger, not in vengeance, only in finality. Some wounds scar, others heal, but healing requires the bleeding to stop. That night, as the stars stretched endlessly above Fort Campbell, I finally felt the weight lift from my shoulders. My soldier's salute still echoed in my chest, a reminder that family is not defined by blood or last names. It is defined by who stands when everyone else walks away. Daniel squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, I smiled without hesitation. My life was no longer anchored in absence. It was built on loyalty, love, and the family I had chosen. And if there is one lesson my story holds, it is this. Blood may bind you, but loyalty makes you family. The people who refuse to leave, who choose you even when it costs them, those are the ones who deserve a place in your future.